As we talk about the crisis in Syria, we have to bring up the Pope. Pope Francis himself is ramping up his opposition to military intervention there. The Pope sent a strongly worded letter to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who, as you know, is hosting the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. This is what the Pope wrote, in part, quote, "It is regrettable that from the very beginning of the conflict in Syria, one-sided interests have prevailed." The Pope urged G20 leaders to abandon, quote, "the futile pursuit of a military solution." Pope Francis is calling for a global day of fasting and prayer for peace in Syria this coming Saturday. And I want to bring in our senior Vatican analyst, John Allen, joining me live from Denver. John Allen, great to see you. You know all things papacy, so we just wanted to bring you on because, listen, this isn't surprising that the Pope stands on military intervention as a pacifist. But this idea of Pope Francis sitting down and writing a letter to Vladimir Putin, is this something that's been done before?
Hey, Brooke. Well, technically, the Pope and the Catholic Church is not committed to pacifism. What they're against are unilateral uses of force that they think are going to make things worse, and that apparently is their calculation with Syria. No, this is not unprecedented. I mean, 10 years ago, as the U.S. was getting ready to go to war in Iraq, then under President George Bush, Pope John Paul II and the Vatican's diplomatic apparatus launched a kind of full-court press against it. That's what we're seeing again today. Not only do we have this very sharply worded letter from Francis to President Putin of Russia, but as you say, he's called for a day of prayer and fasting for peace on Saturday. He personally is going to lead a service in St. Peter's Square. And this morning, the Vatican called in all the diplomats accredited to it. They have diplomatic relations with about 180 countries, including all the major Western powers, to lay out their case against the use of force in Syria. And I think their concerns, Brooke, are pretty clear. At the humanitarian level, they think this is going to widen the conflict and stoke Muslim radicalism. And at the more pastoral level, they're also concerned that this is going to make life significantly worse for Christians. That is precisely what happened in Iraq over the last decade. They're worried it's going to happen again in Syria. So Christians represent about 10% of the population there. It's one of the largest Christian communities in the Middle East. They're worried that they would be the first victims of the fall of Assad. So I think that's what's behind the press that we're seeing today.
That's exactly what I also wanted to ask you about. Just in my reading, it's something like 6 to 10% these Syrian Christians make up in terms of the populace. And I know that many of them have been aligned with the Assad regime. And when we talk about, fallout from a possible military strike, what may that look like for these Syrian Christians?
Well, look, I think the first thing you got to understand, and you're right, the sort of takeaway in the West is that the Christian leadership of Syria is pro-Assad. But you have to understand that from their point of view, the choice is not between a dictatorship and a vibrant democracy. From their point of view, the choice is between a dictatorship and an Islamic theocracy in which they're not going to have any place. And in that choice, I don't think it's much surprise that they tend to prefer the devil they know to the one that they don't. I think the Vatican and Catholic leaders around the world are very sensitive to that. I mean, all you have to do is look at what's happened in post-war Iraq. At the time of the first Gulf War in 1991, there were an estimated 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, the high-end estimate for the number left is about 400,000. Some people think it's closer to 200,000. Most of them gone into exile, but a large number of them have been killed. The church in Iraq has basically been devastated, and what we're hearing from Christians in Syria today is they don't want to repeat the pattern that was set in Iraq.
John Allen, thank you very much. Senior Vatican analyst joining us with his perspective.